Greetings and welcome to Chapter 11 of Interpersonal Communications, Speech 120. And while I'm getting set up here, do the usual, get everything out that you'll need. Your textbook, most importantly, open to page 345, and the ability to take notes, maybe to jot down and think ahead about what you'll write in your summary. Okay, so let's go over to the slides. Let's go to the slides. All right, chapter 11, it's going to be short, okay? And it involves improving communication climates. So now we're starting to get a little bit more into conflict, and which we'll really unpack in chapter 12. So to come away with in this one, you want to think about if you can identify confirming, disagreeing, and disconfirming messages and patterns in your own important relationships and describe their consequences. So these are things you might want to think about writing about. Next, describe how the messages you identified in the previous objective either threaten or honor the self, which is saving face, right? Third, use Gibbs categories and the assertive message format to create messages that are likely to build supportive rather than defensive communication climates. Last, create appropriate non-defensive responses to real or hypothetical criticism. I will tell you that you might find some of these suggestions challenging, and I will say though, the things that you're going to learn in this textbook, the more that you take them out and actually use them, the higher level of satisfaction you will have in whichever relationships you choose to practice these tools on. All right, so let's just jump in on confirming messages. So where will we find that in your book? Okay, so first of all, this idea of a communication climate starts out on page 346. And a climate just refers to the emotional tone of a relationship, right? So what you can, there's a lot of ways you can characterize the climate. It depends on the two people that you're characterizing, right? So it's just the emotional tone of the relationship. You might think about what is the communication climate between your parents, for example, or between someone to a couple that you know, right? So what is the climate in terms of communication? And then there's levels of confirmation, which you'll find on 348. Okay. Well, first of all, no, let's look at 347. Let's take a look at the confirming and disconfirming messages. So confirming messages, they tend to describe messages that convey valuing. They say things like you exist, you matter, you're important. So messages that make you feel that way, okay? Those are confirming messages. And then disconfirming messages, they pretty much say, I don't care, I don't like you, or you're not important to me, okay? So those are the differences between confirming and disconfirming messages, okay? But then these also can be described in levels, these levels of messaging confirmation, okay? And that's on 348. And we're going to go through those right now. Okay, levels of message confirmation. So here are some disconfirming messages. You can also match this up with the table. It's on 348, table 11.1. And then your book goes into great detail. I'm going to give you a summary of each of these. So the first level of a non-confirming message would be an impervious response. Okay, so I put in there kind of like what the person might feel if they were subject to an impervious response, which is I feel ignored. And your book briefly says that it doesn't acknowledge the other person's message. Okay, and there's more to it that I think would be good for you to read, such as the interrupting response. That's sorry, that's the next one. So I would definitely go into more detail on the impervious response. That does bring us to interrupting. which is I feel unheard. Okay. Whereas the impervious response is I feel ignored. The interrupting response is I feel unheard. So that's a person, it can be quite irritating, who constantly interrupts you when you're talking, right? Then next is the irrelevant response, which is it's a comment unrelated to what the other person has just said. Okay, and so there is a great dialogue as an example you can read on that. And then there is what's called a tangential response. I call that the hijacker. Okay, and a tangential is conversational takeaways are tangential responses. Instead of ignoring the speaker's remarks completely, the other party uses them as a starting point to shift to a different topic. I have so many stories I could tell you about that. People that well, one person in particular that I know that does that all the time. So you can, I'd like you to maybe stop and think through each one of these. If you can relate to them personally, that you personally communicated that way, or who can you relate the story to, or these examples to? The next is the impersonal response, right? The labeler, or thanks for the cliche. I say that because the person will just find the closest cliche and put it on there, and you've just been kind of labeled instead of really being heard and understood. Ambiguous is like, so this is a yes or a no. So an ambiguous response to might be, so I have my sister always still today, she always has, when it comes to making a decision, once upon a time that would have been about choosing the video at Blockbuster, or it could be just what we want to eat for dinner. My sister will always answer with whatever's good, whatever you want, it's fine. I'll have anything, whatever. Doesn't matter to me, I don't care, right? So the ambiguous response in your book talks about, contains messages more than one meaning and leaves the other party unsure of the responder's position. So that one can be hard because you're trying really hard to get a specific response out of the person and they're not committed. They're not going to commit to it. In incongruous response, I put that as your lips are moving, but so incongruous means obviously that the person, what they're saying isn't close to what the meaning is. So your book says it's contains two messages that seem to deny and contradict one another. Often at least one of these messages is nonverbal. So, what your body language is saying versus what your words are saying, that would be incongruous. Okay, confirming messages. So still on level of communication, what types of communication climate create confirming messages? So recognition, which gives that person that sense of I matter versus I'm being ignored, right? Acknowledgement. So a person who's very interested will ask questions, they'll paraphrase, they'll reflect on what you're saying, they'll really take it in, and they're really deeply listening to you. And endorsement means I feel validated, okay? So the idea, how the problem is that communication climates develop and they can either spiral and escalate or not spiral and de-escalate, or both. They can go all the way up and come all the way back down. So I'm gonna leave that concept for you in your book on conflict spirals. And I'm going to move to saving face because this is what I want to talk about the most, which is the assertive messaging format. And this is the part that I mentioned in the beginning that a lot of people might have a hard time with. Okay, so these are the steps or the parts in the assertive messaging format. First of all, so this involves you being assertive to somebody else who you care about very much, but that you need to set up some boundaries. Okay, you need to be assertive in some way. So the first step, and if you look, you can find it on page 363. Okay, so we can follow along together in the book. Okay. Okay, so the first step in the process is to name the behavior, but don't interpret it. So you're not going to put a judgment on it. You're just going to name the behavior. Your book has awesome and plentiful examples. Next is to interpret but be curious. This should remind you of another one that we worked on that a lot of you guys shared about. I can't even remember the chapter now, but this kind of mirrors another type of not the assertive messaging format, but another one that we did earlier. So interpretation, but be curious. In the one that we did in a previous chapter, it said provide at least 2 possible explanations, right? So an interpretation is not a judgment, it's more of a trying to understand type of an interpretation. And feeling, so to be vulnerable and kind of open that window and talk about how it affected you feeling wise. And then the consequences, which is not a threat, okay? It's just that it's what happens to me when you, and you complete that sentence. So the consequence is just how I was affected by it, okay? And then the intention. So what is wanted? So you have behavior, interpretation, feeling, consequence, intention, okay? So on pages 362 and 363, there are an abundance of examples and dialogue that can help you to see what that really sounds like. So I will just say that it takes a lot of practice. It takes really a commitment to first remembering what this is, what this format is, and being willing to really take the time when you get an opportunity to try it. But it really does work, and it really does lead to a much higher level of satisfaction in the relationship, but also self-satisfaction. So some guidance for when you're using the assertive messaging format is that firstly, elements may be delivered in mixed order. So the elements being these right here, they can be in a mixed order. Word the message to suit your personal style, right? So you're reading some examples in the book, they may not suit your style. So make sure you're authentic, right? The third thing is to combine 2 elements in a single phrase if you can. So again, all these elements, some of them can be combined. And last, take your time delivering the message. And speaking of time, I would also say use good timing. So not only do you want to set it up so that you have plenty of time to talk, you want to set it up so it's the right time to talk. And we've discussed that in a previous chapter as well. Timing is very important. So how do you respond non-defensively to criticism? So that is a lot to ask when you're being criticized, especially if somebody is belligerent to you. But it's a lot to ask to respond non-defensively. The only thing I can say is if you respond defensively, you're entering the conflict spiral. So when you want to defend yourself, you want to tell the person off because they're saying something to you that's offensive to you, you want to do that. But if you are willing to try little by little another way, you might find that not only does the conflict not spiral, the person may actually de-escalate themselves when you start responding this way. Okay, so it starts on the bottom of page 367, responding non-defensively to criticism. And in the end, I would like just to start out by thinking about it this way. Do you really need to be right? Because that's when you're matching someone defensively, that's what you're both trying to do. You're in a match to try to be right. So do you want to be right? Is that the goal for you? Or do you want to be happy? So you have to get really honest because we all get caught up in wanting to be self-righteous and feels good to be right, but it doesn't resolve conflict. And that's going to be really an important thing to take with you as we go into chapter 12. So how can you respond non-defensively? Well, you can seek more information. So the person, I'll give you a quick story. Long time ago, I worked in a hospital as a volunteer. And we were doing a certain aspect of where we were working on labor and delivery, actually coaching moms who were having babies as volunteers. And the nurses were being laid off at the time. There were lots of layoffs, and their perception of us was not at all accurate about what we were doing there. And one day a nurse came up to me in the hallway and said, you know, we do not like you here. So to imagine someone being that bold and blunt and saying that right to your face, it's easy to feel, get your, be defensive. Your defenses just jump right up automatically. And so I really, I could have answered her in a lot of different ways. I could have responded in a lot of different ways. But instead, I went the seek more information route. And I simply just asked her, I said, well, I know that you don't mean me, that you don't like me because you don't even know me. But what you're talking about is, are you talking about that you don't like the volunteer doulas here? And she said, yeah, because we're all losing our jobs and they're replacing us with with free labor. So there it was. I sought more information. I got more information. And she started explaining instead of telling me she didn't like me, right? And so once she started explaining, immediately things start to get a lot more gentle. And so once she explained what her perception was, I said, yeah, that case isn't even possible. I said, there's no way that we could replace you. We're not here to do that. And then once I explained the scope of our practice, we became very good friends after that. And she was quite an ally for me when I worked there and volunteered there. So asking for specifics, you can guess about the specifics, right? You can say, it sounds like you might be a little bit irritated with me. Is it because I left the water running, or is it something else? Okay, so that's just one silly example. Also, paraphrase the speaker's ideas. If they come at you, if they kind of come out swinging, just paraphrase what they just said. Okay, so are you saying that you're really irritated with me right now? Is that what it is? Or are you, just paraphrase what they just said. Ask what the critic wants. Okay, so ask specifically. So what is it that you want out of this conversation? Or what is the goal? What is it you're trying to get? Also, ask about the consequences of your behavior. So you can say, like, so when I do this, are you saying that this is how it affects you? And then ask what else is wrong. So the idea behind asking what else is wrong is because, first of all, it shows genuine interest. And sometimes there's more wrong than the sender of the message originally thought, or there's something different, which is very common. Once you start asking questions like this, the person who is criticizing realizes that they were under the wrong impression to begin with. And when you say there's something else, they might realize that it's completely different than they thought it was. Okay, so all of these things, what they tend to do, I call it disarming. And I think it's quite a talent and a very advanced talent to be able to disarm people when they're defensive to you. But when you pride yourself in being able to disarm people, it's an incredible talent to have, and it will lead to much more fruitful conversations, both when you're face to face with someone criticizing you, but also when you're helping mediate a situation. And you're understanding that disarming someone first will lead to much more productivity, and it'll just avoid a lot of that heated aspect of responding defensively. And so it does take work, but it is worth doing. I have used this method many, many times, and I'm a human. So there've been many times when I did respond defensively, but when I really have that presence of mind and consciousness, I try very hard to respond this way, only because of the outcomes I've seen over and over again and how well it pays off. Finally, last one. So agree with the critic. So you're agreeing with the facts. You're not agreeing with their perception of you. So you can just, and to me, it's like an energy. I think of like martial arts, where there's certain martial art where you actually use your opponent's force against them. Okay, so when they are pushing, you just get out of the way, and they push, and they run into something, but not you. Okay, so that's the one of the philosophies behind a certain martial art, and it's called Aikido, and I call it communication Aikido. Okay, so it's about just really when their energy is coming, don't resist their energy. Let them. Usually, the force ends up they use their own force against themselves. Okay, and so that's what this idea is about. Agreeing with the critic. So you're not saying someone's right or wrong, or you're right or wrong. You're just saying these are the facts that the critic said, and so you're going to restate those. And but you're not agreeing necessarily. You can also agree with their perception, because that's just, we already know how perception is influenced, right? We've already dealt with that in an earlier chapter. So in the end, again, I put this here: do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? Sometimes when I'm having a bad day, if I'm honest, I want to channel some of my irritation. I kind of want to. So sometimes I look for trouble, but I try really hard to employ the things that we've covered in this chapter. And I really hope that you will too. Thank you so much.